Very excited to have you on the podcast, Dr. Castro.
Well, thanks for having me. This is actually really fun for me. Just this intersection that we're doing today, it's kind of fascinating, and obviously, I'm really into it. So thanks for having me.
Amazing. So here on the Pioneers podcast, we really love the origin story, just really getting to know the guest on this podcast and your journey to date. So if you don't mind, could you share a little bit about your background and what got you to this juncture?
Yeah, I'm gonna reach way back and say it all started as a child. My first healthcare experience wasn't a good one, or major one. Whenever I got sick a lot as a child, and the therapy always seemed like it was always a shot. No matter what happened, I was always going to the doctor and I would get a shot. But then fast forward, I have this scar on my left hand. You really can't see it, and it's a gash from like the top all the way to here. And I was 12 years old. I was thinking I was Michael Jordan. I jumped really high, hit a sign, and when I came down, a piece of the metal cut me open.
Hmm.
And fast forward, I went to the ER and I waited forever, had a horrible experience. And then by the time the doctor saw me, it was really horrible. No anesthetic, and I had to have stitches live. And from then on out, I thought, this is a horrible healthcare experience. And then fast forward, that just gave me the compassion to say, you know what? I want to be that doctor and I want to stand out. I want to do all the things that would make it amazing. And so as my journey began, as an entrepreneur, I always wanted to do more than just whatever Dr. X could do. So when I was in med school, I was writing medical books and medical cliff notes and doing better explanations. When I was in residency, I created my first heart vitamin that went national. I created my own label and my formulation, and I got with cardiologists and created a brand. And then it brings me to the next big point. When the first iPhone came out, I was in the ER, I had just graduated from residency, and I was coding a patient, and I told the nurse, "Hey, we need to start this epi drip." And she's like, "1 second, I just want to verify that dose." And she went and got a textbook and started going through and said, "Okay, here it is." And it took a while. And I'm here looking at my iPhone thinking, there's got to be an app or something for that. And I literally said, you know what, there isn't. I don't know how to do it, but I'm going to teach myself how to program. And literally, I had the first app in the world called IV Meds, and it went viral. And it wasn't a financial thing, but it was one of those things that I said, what can I do to help patients? If I can cut seconds or minutes and give therapy quicker, then I'm helping the masses. And so then fast forward, the reason I'm giving this backstory is two more stories. One, I was not happy in the emergency room, in that I was like, I
Yeah.
feel like they're pushing me to like hurry up and like uh, go to the next patient. And I'm like, I have an MD. I feel like you're treating me like I need to push people like they're cattle. Like they're not.
Mhm.
And so fast forward, I said, you know what? I'm going to get a group of investors. In Texas, you can basically own your own ERs. And I started making my own ERs, my own brand, and my own healthcare way of doing things. And the last story, we'll have more. I'm playing with ChatGPT. Literally, I think I got lucky. It was the day that ChatGPT came out. And long story short, I'm playing with it thinking, this is going to change medicine. And I was so excited that I was on a sabbatical that month. I literally did nothing but write. And within 3 weeks, I had a book out that was called ChatGPT and Healthcare.
Yeah.
And that's where we are today. I've been literally just focused on how can I help people.
Amazing. I love that story. And I think you said in a really interesting juncture where you have a background, obviously, in healthcare, being a doctor yourself, but you also have a foot in technology, right? And with large language models in particular, which I think makes you uniquely positioned to answer a lot of the open questions that a lot of people that we speak to have, which is how do you actually get AI within healthcare done well? For example, your role as CEO at Medical Intelligence Ops, I'm sure you've encountered problems there and other places you've worked at. Um, I'm curious when it comes to AI in healthcare or machine learning, maybe more broadly in healthcare. What are some of the things that you're seeing that are being done well, and where do you think there are still major open gaps that healthcare needs to go and address?
Yeah, it's a good one. So I think some of the things that doing are doing, excuse me, are being done well. are being able just to transcribe. I'm here looking at this keyboard, and if this keyboard, and they call it computer on wheels, is this thing, and the way the setup, let's say you're on my right and the computer's set up this way, I'm literally just looking at you and looking down. And one of the things that I feel like is going on well now is that they're starting to incorporate AI transcription, where our conversation now is being transcribed. I don't have to look at the keyboard. A lot of that is more fluid, and it doesn't sound like a big deal, but when I talk to patients, when I look into your eyes and I can see your mannerisms,
Hmm.
I can see if when I'm having a conversation with you, if you hesitate, if I'm not looking at you, I may miss it. But if there's certain ways you say things, certain pauses, maybe you roll your eyes, something, I won't catch it. But then I feel like I could be a better doctor. And then from an individual holistic point of view, who wants to open up to their doctor and their doctor's looking away? I
Yeah.
mean, this is life or death, or this is something intimate or something to do with your health. And so I think that's one thing that AI is getting correct. I think having this going into the hospital systems, being able to integrate into our workflows, making it easier so that I'm not. There's a colleague of mine that had told me that she's just ecstatic that she now can go home on time. And that sounds
Hmm.
weird, but she would literally stay an hour to two after work just documenting. And I thought, man, this is nice that in real time it's documenting things and it's
Yeah.
quicker. And now that physician is less likely to burn out because guess what? They're home now, as opposed to doing work that, yes, doctors get paid well, but at the same time, that those hours are not paid for. And so you're just working. And so I think that's really good.
Yeah. No, and I think that makes sense, right? I think patients feel better. I think doctors can deliver better care and be more empathetic. And then the personnel that had to take the brunt of the work in transcribing and getting notes in place, they're doing that. But it feels like this technology transcription has been around for 20, 25 years, a long time, right?
Yes.
And it's great that healthcare has it and it has adopted it firmly. But doesn't it feel like that is like too little of a technological leap given just all of the advances that we've seen everywhere else in the software space and in machine learning in general?
Yeah, well said. And I think this kind of brings the next point. Why are we dealing, like this is another example. Hospitals are still giving their fax numbers. Why are we faxing anything to
Yeah.
anyone? Like,
Yeah.
but it's a common thing, and there's like multi-million dollar industries that all they do is secure make sure it's HIPAA compliant faxes that so that one doctor can fax to the other. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. And
Hmm.
and you're right. I mean, we have generative AI, we have all these AI tools. I mean, literally, it's amazing what's out there. Yet, healthcare in general is very conservative. We do things in a different pace, and there's a lot of barriers to adopting. And for one, I look at it as the bell curve of the leadership. We have some
Hmm.
early adopters that are like, hey, this ChatGPT thing, let's just jump in and let's put it into the hospital. Then you have the opposite side that's like, oh no, I will retire before ChatGPT starts in my hospital. And so, and then I also see the difference with when I speak to colleagues in hospitals that are in certain parts of California versus some small town areas of Texas. It's night and day difference. And so to implement, it's going to be interesting because we need to get through those barriers. And the number one thing I think to get through those barriers is going to be education. I'm a firm believer that this applies everywhere. If you're fighting with your spouse, if you're fighting with your sibling, if you just educate each other on how each side feels, then it's not as much adversarial effect in a way because you're able to understand. And I think the bad part for ChatGPT is it is this black box. We don't
Sure.
know how it really works. And so the traditional doctors also, the older doctors, I'm going to call it out and say, in general, the ones that I've been talking to, the older, more traditional doctors that maybe in their 60s are saying, I've done medicine for 30 years.
Hmm.
How is this better than me? Or how can this help me in any way?
Yeah.
And that's when I come in and say, well, let me educate you on the tools. Let me teach you the good, the bad, the ugly. But then let me show you how these tools can help you. I'm an ER board certified doctor with over 20 years experience, and I can honestly say I hate to admit it, but at 3 in the morning, I am not at my best. I'm
Yeah,
probably at
sure.
my best when I wake up in the first 8, 12 hours, maybe 15. But once I hit that hour 20, I'm hurting. And a lot of it is muscle memory. A lot of it is, one plus one is two. But it's that 1% of chance of things that come through that I'm just fatigued. And this is where I think AI would be an amazing complement to my workflow.
Yeah.
Um, I know there's big companies out there. Obviously, everybody has heard of Microsoft, OpenAI, obviously. Epic is one of these big electronic medical records that is out
Hmm.
there. And those three companies are basically working together to improve our workflows. And one of the simplest, easiest ones, as an ER doctor, I'll give an example, is if I get a patient that has been to the emergency room, let's say if I had to print all their records was 400 pages, and within minutes, I'm supposed to know all that. And a lot of times, if I ask the patient, "Hey, did you have this?" They'll say, "Look at my record. I
Yeah,
don't know why you're
sure.
asking me this." And so, having generative AI to allow me to just summarize the last MRIs, the last CAT scans, the trends, it does it better than just going through the EMR and looking at all the diagnosis and that and whatnot. And so I believe for me, this technology it's going to help me get there quicker and more efficient. And it's actually fun. The other part to this is at 3 in the morning when I'm not at my best, how nice is to put all these symptoms into AI. Obviously, I'm not going to put patient's name, any of the 18 HIPAA identifiers, but then put those symptoms and then for it to extract and say, hey, here's your differential diagnosis, and me to go through and be like, holy crap, I did forget this one. Let me go back into the room and push on their belly. Let me do X and Y and make sure, let me order this other test. It's not me saying I'm dumb or me I can't handle it. It's just me saying I'm a human and I'm
Yeah.
just augmenting. One of my favorite phrases I tell doctors is it's not that AI is better than a human or the human is better than AI. It's in my brain, it's human, in this particular case, doctor, plus AI is better than just AI alone or just doctor alone. It's using the best of both worlds. It's really hard to beat me in a way with AI in that I have 20 years of clinical gestalt that I can go in and understand, and there's things that are not in the textbooks, things that are not easily learned, but it's my experience that AI is going to have a hard time with those weird factors. But then I add AI to it, and then I, as a human and an expert, can say, you know what, AI is messing up here. You know what, AI is correct here. And
Yeah.
that's my goal. How can I teach doctors to be able to understand data better and understand when it's correct and when it's not?
Those are some amazing takeaways, right? So I think you're absolutely right. Like, why are we using fax machines? I think you started off with that. I think that's spot on, and it still happens more often than people realize. And I think the aversion to like machine learning and AI is quite real, and some of it comes down to fear or compliance and data regulations and such. But I think the way you distilled it is spot on, which is first, the healthcare system has a number of problems because there's not enough quality doctors and nurses and just healthcare professionals, right? So, if you can use technology to complement the existing workforce, they could be more productive and efficient. I think that's really really important. So, it is about human AI collaboration as opposed to like models and AI replacing humans. And you can also have these models and AI basically index on the top 30% best healthcare professionals out there. So it raises the bar for everyone involved, right? And the models are able to do more of the grunt work that's required. Some of it's like transcription related, preparing notes, digesting prior diagnoses, digesting and analyzing prior conversations. And so you become super armed when you enter the room with the patient with all of that intelligence that would have been hard to distill within minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's not being used in that way. So, as you said, I think the need is there, the technology is there. It's overcoming those barriers. So, could we talk a little bit about those barriers? Because it seems like some of this could be the HIPAA regulations that we face, right? And the use of data, of course, that's part of this. Some of it might be like just organizational barriers. Organizationally, there's like too much red tape and bureaucracy. Some of this might be the profile of the individuals. Like maybe it is a more conservative profession, But the reason why I bring all of this up is, I've grown up basically in the world of investment management. And hedge funds, for example, are a great example where they adopt technology faster than anyone else. And they have to, because any little edge gives them alpha, right? It gives them the opportunity to go beat others in the market. So they are voracious in appetite for new data and analytics and AI, and they adopt it super fast. The closest that I've seen, similar to hedge funds, are tech startups, right? And so
Mm.
basically, the couple of the areas that I've been involved with in my career have been very early adopters in everything technology wise. And then healthcare is one of the seemingly laggards in the space. And so I'm curious, how do we kind of change that? And what do you think are some of the barriers that prevent more early adoption from the players there?
It's a little complicated answer, but this is how I see it. Healthcare obviously is humongous, and within healthcare there's different verticals, and let's just think of it as different specialties in medicine. And some of those specialties lend themselves for AI really quickly just because of the way we look at the data. There's something called structured data and unstructured data. And things that are already structured, think of it as it's already built a certain way, then it's a lot easier to put it into an AI machine learning and get a good output. Whereas if it's not structured data in healthcare, then we're going to have to structure it and figure out how to put it in a structure that we can extract that data. And so my example is this. Everyone's heard of AI in radiology. A lot of the radiologists for years have said, oh yeah, we've had AI. This is not anything new. And it's because that information back in the day was when I started, I remember looking at plain films, and then somewhere in my career, they're like, that was like ancient, and now it's all digital. And so the fact that it's been digitized, now it's structured. And as a result, that structured data now can be fed into a machine learning, let's think of it, a computer can now look for patterns. And now those patterns can be replaced in the sense that I'll give you a real point. One of my colleagues, I'm kind of jealous in that he works in an emergency room that anytime a stroke patient comes in, they do a CAT scan, and the AI is literally watching the CAT scan.
Mhm.
And in real time, we'll say, oh, stroke, and then send it to the radiologist, text the nurse, text the doctor, and say this patient has a stroke, but it's not official until the radiologist sees it. But then the
Yeah.
ER doctor's like, oh, yeah, I see it. And I thought, wow, how amazing. My point of saying that story is we're not there yet for, say, family practice. If I'm interviewing you,
Mhm.
I need to get all this information, but I need to figure out how to make it structured. And you would think like it should be structured. It's in the electronic medical record, all these words,
Yeah.
it's there. It should, but the answer is it's not. And so what I'm telling you is as we start adapting to this, you're going to see certain parts of medicine that has already adapted because it's already structured. And then you're going to see some resistance because there's certain traditional parts of medicine that they're not ready for that. With that said, we've all heard of robotic surgery, and we've all heard of how these things are already created in the OR rooms. And there's a book behind me called Apple Vision Pro, and how it's used in healthcare. And obviously, surgeons, are putting them on, and they're literally using it for surgery, which is kind of
Mhm.
crazy because this thing came out just a few weeks ago. And so my point is this: as we start getting, again, going back to education, as we start getting educated, as we start understanding the good, the bad, and the limitations of this technology, someone like me is going to be able to say, you know what, this can be done. And I'm a big believer in challenging the system. Like just because traditionally we've always done medicine this way doesn't mean we need to continue using the fax machine. Doesn't mean we have to continue.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
it's going to take more younger physicians, not that I'm young, but it's going to take people that are the thought leaders, guys that are ready, or women ready to break the rules and do things differently to change medicine. And so when I look at healthcare, that's one barrier. The other is this unknown thing. We need some graph GPT so that if you and I are going through, let's just say you have, God forbid, a heart attack, but then AI is saying it's so graph that shows me here are the symptoms and here's how you got to the diagnosis, and it opens up this black box, and now I can say,
Sure.
oh,
Yeah.
and so now doctors are like, oh yeah, I see how the AI got to that diagnosis, instead of saying, here's the answer. How many times in math class that we came up with the answer in our head, and then the teacher's like, no, 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 you got to show me how you did the process. Same exact example. And so the other thing I want to say is we need to demystify AI. We need a food label equivalent in AI. So if I'm Dr. X and I'm playing with ChatGPT and I'm looking at it, I have a white label, just like I order. If I give you a medication, there's white labels that tells me. I mean, there's these PDFs that tell me exactly what's in the medicine and the mechanism of action and side effects and all these studies. We need something like that in healthcare, so that the doctor can say, okay, here's Claude AI, here's the good, the bad, the ugly, but it's like a food label. That doesn't exist. But I think if we start having these things in AI, now that unknown's going away. Now the graph GPT is there. Now I'm feeling more comfortable. The other thing is we need more doctors that understand AI or
Sure.
healthcare
Yep.
professional nurses, because if think about it, there's about only 5,000 physicians in the entire planet that really understand AI in healthcare. Man, that's very little. So if I show up at hospital X and I have a widget saying I'm telling this AI, chances are there's no one at the hospital that can check me. That can say, you know what? Is this data drift? Is this a mistake? Is this hallucinating? I mean, they'll know
Hmm.
stuff that's out in the business world or that's on the news, but they really won't understand. And so my next part of this is to kill this barrier. We need to have healthcare professionals that understand AI and are inside the trenches working in the front lines, but also in the C-suite that can help with these decisions that need to be made.
I think those are great insights. I think a couple of things. Uh, I think the interpretability piece is super important. I think that's the only way you could build trust with AI. So you need to be able to understand how AI got to the decision it got to. Because if you can't explain that, you can't develop trust, and without trust, you don't know if the answer is right or wrong, right? And that's really hard. And we see this all the time in the banking and insurance world that we also play in, which is if you come to an underwriting decision, you need to be able to explain how you got to the underwriting decision. So, what documents did you consider? How did you review those documents? What did you conclude about those documents? Ultimately, why does this individual or this business belong in X credit risk bucket? And then you need to be able to show that to the loan officer or the underwriter so they could go and say, yeah, this all makes sense. Let me rubber stamp this. Right. Same thing for physicians is that they need to be able to understand like basically a diagnosis that's been made so they could go in and do a final review. But they need to be able to kind of come to their own conclusions given all the evidence that the AI is supplying. And I think the black box phenomenon in AI has existed for forever, right? I think even with prior gen models have existed, but I think it's particularly the case with large language models, which are the mainstay in this space today. And I do think that a lot of technologists do not do a good job of explaining how this technology works and what it's capable of and which use cases it could be applied to. And so it frankly becomes really hard for physicians to understand this. Physicians are brilliant people, they know their space really well, but when it comes to AI, it might be a little bit more foreign to them. So I think there's a lot more we could do to bridge that gap. But I do want to pull on a thread that seems to be one that you've mentioned a few times, which is physicians, like the bottom up motion is where you think maybe the adoption happens. I want to challenge that a little bit because I think for us we typically view AI adoption as happening top down. So basically, the C-suite or the business owner or the business CEO makes the bot purchase decision, right? And there might be other champions, but they're saying this technology is what we're going to use for all of underwriting or all of claims processing in the banking and insurance world. And then they push that technology down to the underlying individuals, saying this is how we're going to be doing things from here onwards. Do you think in healthcare that happens, or do you think more of the decision making is more grassroots, where it comes bottom up?
I agree with you. It's a catch 22, and let me explain why the top bottom may not work. If the C suite says, hey, Dr. X, you are going to use this tool, at the end of the day, Dr. X is the one in the trenches. That's the doctor that's going to
Mhm.
implement it. And if physicians and I'll throw in nurses and whatnot are in there, they're not happy with the tool. They're not going to use the tool. And so the other part to this is usability. If you ask a doctor, and this is why I'm really big on doctors getting educated in AI and being in the C suite and also being in the startups,
Mhm.
if if some serial entrepreneur comes up with this amazing idea in AI and shows it to a doctor and says, "Here's the end product," and the C-suite approves it, they may be like, "Why did you spend all this time and energy on this? Why did the hospital spend all this on this gadget when we really have a need and why?" And so that's a barrier. That's why I'm not too thrilled about the top bottom. With that said, yes, if you're going to force doctors to say this is the way it's going to work, if the doctors and healthcare professionals are not involved, the workflow may actually suffer. The company may
Mhm.
think, oh, this is going to help increase productivity, this is going to increase patient satisfaction. But if those key players that are in the trenches are not involved in the process, are not part of the decision making, are not saying, it may not work. And so that's why I think it's more of a combination of having a doctor that understands AI, that has the experience, that is working with the startups, that is part of the
Yep.
decision process, that is picking which gadgets should be done or which AI or not. Um, and I really believe that. And the sad part is we don't have enough healthcare professionals that have this
Mhm.
understanding. And the truth is, we're not there yet. So on my angle, it's just kind of like my own PR service that I'm doing out there. It's like, let me teach doctors, let me explain, let me help hospitals out, let me do these things, and let me find a group of doctors that really understand this and have this movement move forward. Because at the end of the day, and I know most doctors will agree when I say it's all about the patient. It's not about us. It's really like, how can we help patients? How can we deliver better healthcare? The truth is, healthcare right now, it really does suck. I mean, the
Mhm.
average doctor only gets about 13 minutes with their patients. And the sad truth is, the administrators and insurance companies are really pushing for more out of the doctors and healthcare professionals. My personal worry is that this AI, if let's say it saves 10 minutes on every hour, that the insurance company will say, you know what, you're actually seeing more patients now. This is now the standard, and we're not going to pay you more. We're going to actually pay you less because you need to see more patients. And I feel
Mhm.
like, unfortunately, in healthcare, that's the other barrier. Businesses are looking at it as a business, and healthcare professionals are looking at it as a profession for health. And I
Sure.
personally, my little mantra is, my first check that I ever got in healthcare, I actually felt guilty. I was like, wow, I'm getting paid to do something I love. I'm getting paid to do something that I would have done for free. You know, obviously I needed a paycheck to pay my student loans and whatnot, but at the end of the day, it's that altruistic feeling that we need to help others, and that's really instilled in a lot of healthcare providers.
Yep. I think that's great. I think you're right. There's a divide between the people that are using this technology, so the physicians themselves, and the ones that might make more of the purchase decisions or administrative decisions. And if there's a disconnect, then basically two parts of the org aren't speaking to one another, right? And they could be at odds. And that could be a barrier to really getting adoption and ROI. So, one of the questions I have is, what would you say to investors or venture capitalists that are trying to build and invest in AI products in this space? What is the right way to get pilots done where you get big purchase decisions from maybe the administrative side, so the business side of these institutions, but you're also getting basically adoption from the underlying users, the physicians that are on the front lines?
For me personally, I work with different hospital systems and different healthcare professionals, and my favorite line in life is, let's work backwards. Let's talk to like a think tank. Let's talk to the front lines. Let's talk to the different parts of the hospital and figure out what the problem is. Because to you and I, we may see a problem and be like, oh, of course it's this. But then when you talk to the masses in the hospital system, in that micro organism, and they say, you know what, it's this, then from there we can say, okay, what in technology can affect that? Or, because I can tell you right now that if you ask ER doctors, because I'm an ER doc, I'll use this as an example, what are the top three problems? I would have a hard time believing that that same list will be the same top three for the administrators. It'll be
Mhm.
two different angles. And so my whole point is, how, if I was a startup, how would I do it? I would have the ER doctor say if I was that's the problem, and I'd have administration and try to figure out what the true problem is, and how to get the most yeses out of both sides. And then I literally would work backwards. I love AI. I study AI, and I personally would say, okay, here are the tools that exist. Here are the tools that don't exist. Let's create that project or that AI to help alleviate that problem. And then now I have the buy-in of the administration. I have the buy-in of the physicians and the workflow. And now as I'm building, I'm literally building with them. And so when it comes to implementation, there's a very high chance that it will succeed, because then hospital A will like it, hospital B. And then the nice thing about these models, as you know, there's this thing called federated learning. I could, in theory, have each hospital teach the model and yet keep the data at those hospitals and give that best care. My best example is there's this New York hospitals, and they created this thing called New York Tron, and it's several hospitals that are part of a system. And what they did is they used all their data and they created an algorithm to help predict when a patient should be discharged or help predict the
Yep.
analytics. And those are the tools that I'm seeing popping up. Mayo Clinic is starting to work on something like that. New York Tron, I just mentioned. Gatortron is one in Florida. They're doing that. And fast forward, I really think this is the future. We all know ChatGPT because we heard it in the news. It's always out there, but is that the one for healthcare? My answer is probably not. Not to
Yeah.
promote my book, but this book over here that says Bing Copilot LLM, that was my thing, saying we need large language models that are trained for healthcare,
Sure.
specific for healthcare, that the data is from physicians, and that the reinforced learning is from physicians. Most people
Yep.
don't know that reinforced learning for ChatGPT 3.5 and 4, a lot of it came from Africa. They pay minimum wage, and these individuals that maybe weren't doctors were told, hey, these symptoms is chest pain and this is an MI, and they're like, yeah, that sounds right. Okay, thumbs up. But that's not the right training. If
Yeah.
you really want to
Yep.
train it, and then the other part that I do a talk on this is you have the right specialty, train the right AI. If I'm an ER doc, I have no business in, say,
Yep.
surgery. I'm not a surgeon. So I'm be great at reinforcing the right model, which would be ER.
So my question on this is, how do we support the use of PHI and PII data with these models? Because the value of the PII and PHI might be significant, right? It might be relevant to context, particularly for the model to infer, for example, different patient notes and be able to know that this individual had this procedure or that procedure at this facility or another facility. So all the context is really relevant for large language models to do well. So how do we basically operate in a world where you're in a very regulated industry and you have all the sensitive data, but at the same time, the players that are hosting these models, like an OpenAI, have their own servers, right? Is there a way uh, to potentially share this sensitive data so that you get the best performance and best outcome for your patients with a player like OpenAI? Or if that's not a possibility at all, what are those alternatives? And then one of the things that we've seen is potentially using open source and building on your own infrastructure. But curious if that comes up in your conversations.
No, it does. And that's a tough one. I'm happy to see someone like Epic working with OpenAI and basically trying to figure out how to make sure that this data is secure, HIPAA compliant, and that it's usable, and that doctors and healthcare professionals are able to use it. The and unfortunately or fortunately, Epic's not everywhere, so there's different flavors. And then the other thing I always talk about, I see life as we don't need a machine gun to a fight. We may just need our fists. And so what I'm saying is we may not need ChatGPT. We may be able to get away with Llama, train it locally,
Yeah.
put it on our local servers, use our own data that stays at our own hospital system, and it never leaves our hospital network. I know that OpenAI has created different, the Enterprise Edition, and they're obviously in bed with Microsoft. And in my mind, I feel like Microsoft is playing chess in that they have all the components. If you believe, if you trust, it's all about trust. So they have the HIPAA secure server. They have ChatGPT saying, "Hey, we're not taking any data, and we won't train your data. Don't worry." But then again, that's trust. Like, are they really taking your data or not? I mean, for some people, they're like, oh, no, they are, and I don't trust it. Or some others are like, no, I believe them. There, other parts of this is there's claiming that when we use our APIs, they're not really being used at our cloud, is actually being used on your side. And this is just the conversational piece, it's not the data
Mhm.
piece. And so me talking to you is just the API is just helping me translate or have this conversation. But the doctor knowledge is staying with me, is staying inside.
Yep.
That's my analogy. But the problem is will healthcare hospitals, is that good enough?
Yeah.
I really think it's going to be the bell curve again. We're going to get some people saying, yeah, that works. And then we're going to say other hospital systems saying, no, that doesn't work. And to my analogy is they may not need this fancy ChatGPT. They literally may be able to get away with Llama. And the fun part, I'm going to show these glasses off. This is by Llama. These are the Meta glasses, and I can take a picture and I can pair this with ChatGPT, and it could talk to me. So as you ask me questions, I can repeat them, and then this would process, and it would tell my ear, and then I could tell you. But what I'm saying, what the reason I'm wearing them in here is because I could take pictures of an X-ray, EKG, and it could look at it and help me understand what's going on and alternate. So that's going to be amazing. So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I think you're right. I think we take a very aggressive stance in some ways here. Maybe it's counterintuitive to some, which is we strongly believe that in these regulated industries like healthcare, you will certainly want to have a large language model that is hosted on your infrastructure. And the reason why that's the case is that the data that the large language model needs is all of the data that you have that's very sensitive. So the more data that's available to a large language model, the better it will get over time, particularly if you do fine tuning off of like a Llama 2 variant. And so building on your infrastructure with your data never leaving your walls is going to be the most secure and the best way for there to be more adoption, particularly among very large hospital systems, right? Where these considerations are super important. Yes, there will be some hospital systems and some physicians that are okay with maybe the use of their data by an OpenAI or Azure OpenAI, but our firm belief is that the majority will want to build in their own walls, just given the sensitivity around this. And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out because OpenAI and OpenAI's model is very, very different than like the Llama 2 based version that you're seeing. It does mean that there might be a more of a difficult adoption curve because Llama 2 off the shelf isn't quite as good as an OpenAI model, right? So you basically experiment with OpenAI and then you move to a Llama 2. That's typically the transition that we've been seeing.
And I'm going to add the fact two things. One, going back to my analogy, you may not need ChatGPT if you're a cardiologist and or a specialist that you're doing repetitive things and it's not as diverse and the data is very similar. It's a lot easier to do a llama equivalent versus ChatGPT. It's and then the second part is Llama is getting a nice injection of cash, and they're getting about $10 billion worth of chips. And so it'll be really interesting to see where Llama this time next year is, because once that model is being trained, there's speculation that this open source model may be as good as ChatGPT 4. And if that happens, that's going to be really interesting for all of us because now we have more, like back in the day, you had beta and VHS, and you had the Nokia phones that had the text, and then the iPhone came out. You'll have more options, which is really good for us because now we'll be able to do that for healthcare. So I'm personally stoked.
That makes a lot of sense. What about the pressure that comes from having really great advice, medical advice, available to everyone via an app, right? Because essentially, if you train a domain-specific model in any subdomain in healthcare, you get really great results to the end consumer. And in one ways, that's great for the consumer. On the other side, it may be actually a cause of fear or concern, at least anecdotally, we hear that from the healthcare system because all of a sudden it may be harder to get patients in the door. Maybe they're getting wrong medical advice. Maybe they're doing more self-diagnosis. All of which have existed, by the way, with Google, but it's now supercharged with these models. I'm curious if you're hearing or seeing similar things, and where do you think this ultimately plays out in a couple of years from now?
No, great question. I I talk about this a lot. I'm more worried about this technology outside of the United States because I feel like outside of the United States, you're more likely to just say, "Oh, you know what? ChatGPT told me I had XYZ disease. I'm going to go to the pharmacy and ChatGPT told me to try this drug and I'm done. I don't need a doctor. Here's I just need $20 a month and I'm good." Whereas in the United States, it's a little bit tough in that you can't just pick up meds, unless you're a doctor yourself or have a friend to hook you up. That's not going to happen. And I'm more worried about patients thinking that this is 100% and not understanding that this thing hallucinates. In fact, I've taken it to the next level, and I'm encouraging every hospital administrator that I meet with to actually have a sign up in their waiting rooms, in their hospitals, saying, hey, ChatGPT or AI hallucinates. Hey, here's some risks, because I'm really concerned about patients starting to self diagnose or delaying care, or saying, you know what, healthcare is expensive. I'm just going to ride this one out, and then God forbid they die because they waited too long. And so it's a double edged sword in that, yes, it could help, but at the same time, it may delay care, and I'm really worried. So, my personal solution to this is, for now, I don't mind teaching all the doctors in the world because they are a doctor. They understand when this thing hallucinates because it doesn't sound right to them for the most part. Whereas patients are not, didn't go through medical training, don't have 20 years of healthcare experience. So with them, I'm saying, let's work together. Bring your computer to the office. Let's use ChatGPT together. If ChatGPT told you X, Y, then we need to have something in our healthcare system that allows a validation to says, you know what, doctor says, yeah, that is correct, or your nutritionist says no. And so it's a dicey issue, but I want to share a quick fun example. Everyone's used Instacart. Imagine you have diabetes. Imagine I'm your doctor, and we sit down together and use AI and go through and say, you know what, your sugars are kind of high. Your hemoglobin A1C is the average sugar, and this thing's telling me your sugar's been averaging 200. That's not good for you. And then together I can put you on a keto diet, and I can have ChatGPT give me the actual diet. I can
Mhm.
actually go down to the ingredients, and then together I could put it on your Instacart. And by the time you're home, those groceries that you and I use technology, we leverage that keto diet, we leverage the things you don't like, and now that is true healthcare to me. That is amazing because now I'm leveraging
Yeah.
technology, I'm helping you, and I'm getting an amazing output. And then I'm verifying it to make sure that these things are correct.
Yeah, I think one of the great apps that still maybe doesn't exist but could is you have an app that's been vetted by doctors. You get that reinforcement learning there, and it's integrated with things that are very valuable, right? So you're able to call in drugs to the pharmacy. You're able to get nutrition help by basically getting groceries delivered per the doctor's orders. And I think there's just a great value add, which is extending the reach of physicians. Because if you're no, I think what you said was 13 minutes per patient is the physician time. That's not a whole lot of time, right? But if you could take the brains of physicians and then design a large language model with that knowledge, then all of a sudden you get to be spending hours over the course of a month or a year gaining a lot of that valuable knowledge, as opposed to turning to unvetted sources from Google or from an OpenAI model. So I think that is a very, very beautiful outcome. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about everything that you've done, with books and talks. What are some of the big ideas that people should hear about that they could basically turn to, maybe some of the resources that you've pulled together for more context in the future?
Well, I'm gonna be biased here and say you need to follow me on LinkedIn or social media. It's Harvey Castro MD. Honestly, I literally post about this stuff every single day, and every time I see some new technology, I'm thinking, okay, how can me as a doctor or me as a patient use this? And I'm out there kind of waving the flag and saying, hey, this is how it could be done. And at the end of the day, if you don't want to follow me or not, it's fine. The main thing is you just gotta ride the bike. You need to learn about AI, study it, keep up with it, find an influencer or two that you like, and listen. Because I think no matter what, this is not going away. We're going to learn from it. And the more you know how to use these tools, the more you're going to start integrating them into your life and into your workflows, and you're going to be more efficient.
I love that
And
message,
then
Dr. Castro.
and
Really
and then the
appreciate
last
that.
thing is
Yeah.
I do have a bunch of books on Amazon. This one over here is the latest. It came out this week. It's called Apple Vision Healthcare Pioneers, and it's basically my goal of how can we use the newest technology in healthcare. And I go through different scenarios in the future and AI and combining the different technologies. So I really appreciate you guys having me. So thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show, and I'm very excited to follow up with you. I think uh, navigating healthcare is a very difficult thing for a lot of people that are introducing AI technology like us. I think you have a really good foot in both doors, both sides, which is healthcare plus the machine learning world. And I think evangelizing more of what you know to more of the people in your space and helping players like ourselves basically navigate those waters I think will lead to beautiful outcomes. So very much looking forward to that. Thanks for being on the show, and look forward to having you in a year or so from now, where we could talk about the real impact that AI is starting to have in the broader space at large.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to it, and I look
Yeah.
forward to talking to you soon.